The sky above the jungle moon was peaceful until a loud explosion broke the silence. A fireball tore through the clouds and crashed deep into the trees with a thunderous sound. Smoke rose from the burning wreck, twisting into the sky like a warning. Animals fled, leaves shook, and birds scattered as something heavy slammed into the ground. Hidden behind thick bushes, an alien girl with violet skin and glowing eyes watched the smoke. Her name was Zara, and she had never seen anything fall from the sky before. Her tribe always warned her to stay away from strange things. But her curiosity was stronger. She held her breath, stepped out from hiding, and carefully walked toward the crash site. The wrecked pod lay in pieces, burning, hissing, and cracked open like a broken egg. Inside, she saw a strange creature unlike anything from her world. It was a male human, dressed in torn black armor. Blood on his forehead. And unmoving, Zara's heart beat fast. Her fingers trembling as she stepped closer. Was it alive, or was it dead? She wondered. She reached out slowly and touched his arm. Wive was warm, still breathing, but weak, she thought. She looked over his body, confused by the strange shape and design of his suit. But then, something else caught her attention, between his legs. Something looked swollen. Her kind had no such part, and her first thought was it must be an injury. Zara tilted her head and poked it gently, watching as it twitched under her touch. Startled, she stepped back. Her eyes wide. It moved, she whispered, unsure. What it meant, she had healing training in her tribe. But nothing like this. Was it poison, heat, or infection causing the swelling, she thought. She looked around for leaves and herbs in her pouch and placed them nearby. Then, carefully, she reached out and rubbed the swelling slowly, thinking it might help. To her surprise, the human groaned and shifted, his face tightening like in pain or maybe not pain. Zara froze, her hands still on him, unsure if she should stop or continue. Before she could decide, the man's eyes opened. He gasped, grabbed her wrist, and tried to sit up, but his body was too weak. Zara pulled back, scared, and held her hands up. No harm, she said in her native tongue. Hoping he'd understand her calm tone, the human blinked, eyes darting between her face and where her hand had been. He tried to speak, but only coughed, his throat dry and raw. Zara opened her water skin and helped him drink. He stared at her, confused but not afraid. Their eyes locked for a moment, both realizing they didn't understand each other's words. But something unspoken passed between them, a silent agreement, a strange bond, in a strange place. Zara pointed to the jungle and then to herself, then pointed back at him, trying to say follow. He nodded weakly, and she helped lift him, placing his arm over her shoulders, step by slow step. They moved through the thick jungle, birds watching from above. Zara took him to an old shelter made of bones and leave something her tribe no longer used. It was hidden, safe, and dry from the falling ash and strange red rain that came after the crash. The man collapsed inside, breathing hard but alive. Zara made a small fire using crystal rocks and tree sap. She looked at the swelling again, but decided not to touch it this time. Instead, she gave him a bitter root to chew, a healing herb from her world. He accepted it slowly, grimacing at the taste. She smiled gently, showing him it was okay. The swelling still confused Herb. She figured it could wait. For now, keeping him alive was more important. Night fell quickly on the jungle moon. Strange sounds echoed in the dark whispers. Howls, distant growls. Zara sat near the fire, her eyes on the man, who was now resting. He turned in his sleep, muttering strange words she couldn't understand. Suddenly, he gasped and sat up slightly, his hand covering the swelling. Zara looked at him, curious again. He saw her staring and quickly covered himself with a piece of his suit. His face turned red, even in the firelight. Zara blinked. Confused by his reaction, she had only wanted to help, but maybe she had done something wrong. Still, something about him made her want to stay close. She didn't understand what the swelling meant. But one thing was clear. This human had fallen from the sky, and now their strange journey together had just begun. The human woke up with a jolt, gasping for air as his eyes adjusted to the low flicker of firelight. His head pounded, his chest felt heavy, and his body was sore all over. But the strangest part was the alien girl kneeling beside him, her curious eyes focused exactly where he didn't want them to be. His hand shot down to cover himself, his face turning red even through the dirt and sweat. She didn't move away, only tilted her head again like she had done nothing wrong. In her hands were smooth stones soaked in oil, and her fingertips had a greenish paste. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound came out. His throat felt like sandpaper, and his muscles refused to obey. She leaned in and gently placed a wet leaf over his lips. The cool moisture helped a little, and he blinked slowly. Still trying to figure out what was going on, the alien girl didn't speak his language. But she was calm, steady, and far too interested in his body. She pointed at the swelling again and then mimed an explosion with her hands. He groaned and shook his head quickly, waving his hands in protest. "No, no, no," he rasped, not knowing if she'd understand a word, but she smiled softly like she'd just confirmed a theory. And her tail flicked behind her in satisfaction. He looked around the small shelter made of bone, bark, and woven leaves. It was crude but solid, and somehow the temperature inside stayed warm despite the cold ash falling outside. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the walls, old alien markings that pulsed with blue light. The human didn't know what they meant, but they made his skin crawl slightly. The alien girl picked up a dried fruit from her satchel and broke it in half. Offering one piece to him, he hesitated, sniffed it, then took a bite, and his stomach growled louder than both of them expected. She laughed, not a mocking laugh, but bright and curious, like she had never heard a human sound before. He laughed too, though weakly, his ribs hurting with each breath. It was the first moment they both forgot about the crash, the jungle, and the swelling. But it didn't last long, because a low growl echoed from outside. The girl's ears twitched, and she suddenly became serious. She dropped low to the ground, grabbing a spear made of black bone, and motioned for silence. The human froze, not understanding, but sensing danger. Something moved beyond the leaves, heavy and slow, with claws that scratched the wood. The alien girl peeked outside, her body tensed like a predator. Then she pulled back in and quickly dragged a blanket of thick moss over the human. He didn't argue, staying still and letting her hide him as she crouched near the door. The growling stopped and only silence remained. Minutes passed like hours, and the only sound was the fire crackling low. Finally, the girl relaxed a little and whispered something to herself. She turned to him and gave a small nod, like saying it was okay now. But her eyes told a different story. She was still alert, still ready to fight. The human sat up slowly, careful not to hurt himself more. He pointed at the door, then mimed claws and teeth, then made a questioning face. She understood and nodded once, then drew a shape in the air with her fingers. It looked like a massive lizard with horns and spikes. Whatever it wasn't friendly. And it was still out there. He rubbed his face, overwhelmed, injured, and stuck in a place where even the trees looked like they could eat him. But then he looked at her again, this alien girl who had saved him, fed him, and protected him. And yes, had definitely rubbed the one thing she shouldn't have. Yet she didn't seem embarrassed or ashamed. In fact, she looked at him with a kind of innocence he couldn't explain, like she didn't know why he reacted the way he did, but she wanted to understand. He touched his chest, then pointed at her and smiled. Her face lit up as she copied him, placing her hand on her chest. "Zara," she said slowly. Her voice soft but certain. He blinked and repeated it. "Zara." She nodded, happy, then pointed at him, asking for his name. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Evan." The fire crackled. The wind howled through the trees, and far off, something growled again, but inside the small shelter. Two beings from different worlds had spoken their first names. Zara sat beside Evan, closer than before, watching him with interest, and as the flames flickered across their faces, he noticed something else. Her eyes kept drifting back to the swelling. He groaned and turned away, covering himself with a piece of his shredded suit. Zara, still not understanding why that part was so forbidden, simply whispered, "Strange? Human," and smiled to herself. And outside, something else watched them both, waiting for the right moment to strike. A strange clicking echoed through the dark jungle, slow and steady like claws tapping on stone. Evan opened his eyes with a start, heart racing. As something heavy moved outside their shelter, the fire was low now, casting long shadows that danced. On the walls, Zara was not beside him, and for a moment, panic gripped his chest. He sat up too fast, groaning from the pain in his ribs. His eyes searched the room until they spotted her just outside the entrance, crouched low with her spear. Her tail was still, her body tense like stone. Her ears locked on the sound, she turned slightly and put one finger to her lips, then pointed to the trees. There in the bushes was a pair of glowing orange eyes. They blinked slowly, watching them, not afraid. "Not in a hurry," Zara whispered. Something under her breath, something Evan couldn't understand. But he didn't need translation. The fear in her voice said enough. The creature stepped forward, tall as a small tree, covered in black scales that shimmered in the moonlight. Its jaws dripped with green liquid. Hissing as it sniffed the air, Zara threw a small glowing rock at it, and the creature hissed and stepped back. That gave her time to rush inside and pull Evan farther from the entrance. She spoke fast and low, her hands drawing wild shapes in the air. Evan didn't understand, but he could see it in her eyes. If they stayed, they'd die. He nodded, and struggled to stand, holding on to her for support. Zara threw a blanket over the fire, and smoke filled the small shelter outside. The creature roared. Slamming its tail against the ground, Zara grabbed a pouch and slung it over her shoulder, pulling Evan with her into the back of the hut. There, hidden behind thick vines, was a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for both of them. They crawled into it, the walls damp and breathing with old life. The tunnel led them into the deeper jungle. Far from the wreck, far from safety, hours passed as they moved, careful and silent. Avoiding glowing plants and hidden holes, Zara moved like a shadow, quiet and sure. While Evan tried to keep up without falling, his injuries slowed him, but she never left him behind, not even once. They finally stopped near a cliff where a narrow path led down to a hidden valley. Evan collapsed near a tree, gasping. While Zara scanned the trees above, the air smelled different here, less ash, more green, and something else, something. Alive, strange flowers pulsed with faint light, and bugs floated in glowing clouds. Zara sat beside him and pulled out a soft cloth soaked in sweet-smelling oil. She pressed it to his forehead, and Evan closed his eyes. Relaxing for the first time in hours, she watched him quietly, her fingers brushing across his jaw as if trying to read his pain. When her hand moved lower, he caught her wrist gently, his eyes opening halfway. She looked down at the swelling again and gave him a puzzled expression. Her hand moved again, slowly this time, touching it lightly. Evan groaned and gently moved her hand away. Shaking his head, she sighed, clearly frustrated. Not by rejection, but by confusion. Why did he react like that? She wondered. Was it sacred? Was it dangerous? Was it only for battle? She wanted answers. Not for lust, but for understanding. To her, The swelling was like any other strange part of his body, and she needed to know. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated the ground beneath them. Zara jumped to her feet, eyes wide, and looked toward the cliffs. Evan stood slowly, watching as dust poured down from the rocks above. Then the trees split apart, and a massive machine stepped into view. It was old, rusted, and covered in vines, but it moved. A walking mech with a glass dome head and large claw arms. Zara had never seen such a thing in her life, but Evan's eyes widened with recognition and hope. He stepped forward, ignoring the pain, and shouted weakly. The machine froze, turned its head slowly, and scanned the area. Then, to Zara's shock, it knelled its claw, folding into a ramp. Evan smiled, turning to her, and pointed. Safe, he whispered. She looked at the machine, then back at him, her tail flicking with uncertainty before she could speak. The machine projected a hologram in the air. An old Earth symbol glowed above it. Survivor beacon detected. Zara stepped closer, eyes wide with wonder. They walked inside together, and the door hissed shut behind them. Lights flickered on, and the cabin was filled with soft hums. Evan collapsed into a padded chair, finally able to rest without fear. Zara sat beside him, still confused by this strange human technology. Her eyes glanced one more time toward his lap. She reached over, poked it gently again, then whispered, "Still swollen." Evan buried his face in his hands and muttered something that made her laugh. And for the first time since the crash, they both laughed together, unaware that something far more dangerous was watching from the stars above. The machine jolted suddenly in the middle of the night, waking Evan with a sharp shake. His head hit the back of the seat, and lights inside the cabin flashed red. Zara stood all ready, tail raised, eyes wide as a warning alarm buzzed through the walls outside the glass window. Giant flying creatures with glowing wings circled above the jungle. The mech had stopped moving, its legs frozen mid-step, half buried in mud and vines. Steam hissed from the joints, and sparks danced along the control panels. Evan stumbled toward the main console, trying to read the Earth symbols. He pressed a button marked Emergency Reset, but nothing happened. Zara leaned over beside him, watching the strange human machine with fascination. She pointed to a glowing tube near the back of the room that was leaking blue fluid. Evan followed her hand and nodded. It was the power line, probably ruptured during the last step. He grabbed a toolkit from the wall and limped over, his side still sore from the crash, as he worked to patch the leaking tube. Zara stayed close, watching every move. She had never seen someone fix a machine like this before, not with care, not with calm. To her, machines were either alive or dead, not something a person could heal, but Evan treated it like a living thing, whispering softly to it like it could hear him just as he tightened the last clamp. The lights flickered back to green. The machine groaned like a tired beast waking up, and then the engine hummed to life again. Zara smiled, amazed by his skill, and placed a hand gently on his back. He turned to her and smiled too, but his knees gave out and he collapsed into her arms. His skin was burning, sweat pouring from his face, and his hands trembled. Zara lowered him carefully onto the floor. Touching his forehead, his body was overheating. His breath short and shallow, he was burning with fever. She whispered softly, words from her tribe meant to call healing spirits. She knew what to do, or at least what her people believed in. She pulled out 3 glowing herbs from her pouch and crushed them with her palms. She mixed them with a drop of sap and spit, creating a thick paste. Then, without hesitation, she unfastened the front of his suit to place the mixture on his bare skin. His chest rose and fell quickly, heart pounding beneath her hands. The swelling between his legs had returned, more intense now than ever before. Zara's eyes narrowed. This Had to be part of the sickness, she thought. She didn't hesitate, placing both her hands gently on the swollen area and pressing softly. Evan groaned, his hand twitching toward hers, but he was too weak to stop her. She rubbed the swelling slowly, thinking she was helping him release the poison. But instead, it only grew harder, warmer, almost pulsing like it had its own heartbeat. She frowned, unsure if it was working or getting worse. Then his eyes opened slightly, glazed but aware. "Zara." "No," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. She froze, her hands still. Staring at him, confused and hurt, he saw her expression and forced a weak smile, reaching up to touch her cheek. It's not sickness," he said, struggling. For words, she leaned in, her ear close to his lips, trying to understand normal. "For male," he added slowly. Zara blinked, then pulled back slightly. Still unsure, she looked down at the swelling. Then at his eyes, then back again. "You hurt?" she asked softly, using one of the few words she had learned from listening. Evan shook his head with effort. "No hurt." Zara sat back, her hands on her lap now. Trying to understand what she had just done, they sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the quiet hum of the machine. Zara reached into her satchel again and pulled out a cooling cloth soaked in crystal water. She placed it across his forehead, gently stroking his hair. Evan sighed and closed his eyes. Finally resting, hours passed, and the jungle outside grew quiet again. But something far away flashed in the night sky, like a beacon calling to something. Ancient Zara looked up through the window and saw it. A red star blinking unnaturally, she narrowed her eyes, her instincts whispering that more was coming. Something dark. She turned back to Evan. Still weak, but breathing steadily. She didn't know why she cared so much, but she knew one thing. She would protect him, even if her own people returned. Even if the stars fell from the sky, she would not leave him. And if that strange swelling returned again, well, at least now she knew it wouldn't kill him. Asterisk. A loud horn echoed across the valley, deep and vibrating like thunder rolling from the trees. Zara stood quickly, grabbing her spear, her eyes wide with fear. Evan opened his eyes just in time to see her crouch low, her muscles tense. She whispered one word that he didn't understand, but the fear in her voice was clear. Above them, the sky changed color, turning from deep purple to flashing orange. The blinking red star from the night before was now pulsing like a heartbeat. Zara looked through the window of the broken mech and clenched her jaw. "They're coming," she said, even though Evan didn't understand the words. From the trees, dark shadows moved fast, leaping between branches without sound. Armor glinted under the leaves, and sharp spears flashed in the moonlight. Zara backed away from the entrance and pointed toward the hatch behind the mech's wall. Evan nodded, forcing himself to his feet, his body still weak, but ready to run. They slid down a tunnel of metal and roots, landing deep underground in a hidden chamber. Old alien symbols glowed along the walls, faint and ancient. Evan touched one, and the whole room lit up, reacting to his presence. Zara turned to him, stunned, whispering a prayer under her breath. "No one from my people could wake these lights," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Evan looked around, confused but alert. In the center of the chamber was a tall structure like a stone egg, smooth and humming. Zara approached it and placed her hand on the side, and it responded. To her too, but not the same way. Before they could study it more, a sharp metal sound echoed behind them. The hatch they came through was being pulled open. Inch by inch, Zara pulled Evan behind the egg-shaped pillar and held her breath. Then the wall split open on the other side, and 3 aliens stepped in, heavily armed, tall, and angry. They wore red cloaks over black armor and had eyes that glowed like fire. Zara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized them. They were from her own world hunters, enforcers of tribal law, and they were here for her, not Evan. One of them shouted her name, demanding she come out. Evan reached for a broken tool on the ground, gripping it like a weapon, but Zara touched his arm and shook her head slowly. "If they see you, they'll kill you first," she whispered. She stepped out slowly, holding her hands up. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his face cruel and full of pride. "You broke the law." He growled in their language. "You?" Touched the outsider. Zara stood tall, refusing to bow. "He fell from the sky," she said calmly. "He was dying, and I saved him. You shared food, fire, shelter. And now, your soul," he spat. Evan couldn't understand the words. But he knew this wasn't a friendly reunion. He stepped out too, weapon raised, ready to fight. The hunters laughed, mocking the human. One of them stepped forward and struck Evan across the face, knocking him to the floor. Zara screamed and lunged, her spear flashing like lightning. She stabbed the attacker in the leg, spinning to protect Evan. The chamber's walls responded again, pulsing with light and shaking. With energy, the egg-shaped pillar in the center cracked open slowly. Light pouring from inside, everyone stopped and turned as a voice echoed from the walls. "Not human. Not alien, but something older. Chosen seed-bearer detected." It said, clear and booming. Evan stood, blood on his lip, confused and blinking. The light from the pillar wrapped around him. Lifting him a few inches off the ground, Zara fell to her knees, eyes wide with shock and something deeper understanding. The hunters stared in disbelief, unsure if they should run or kneel. The voice spoke again, human and native bloodlines. "Compatible. Cycle may begin." Zara stood slowly, moving toward Evan, her hand reaching out. The light faded, and Evan dropped gently back to the floor. He looked at Zara, dazed. "What was that?" he whispered. She didn't answer, only helped him up, her hand tightly gripping his. The hunters backed away slowly, confused and shaken. The one with the injured leg turned and limped out, dragging his pride behind him. Zara turned to Evan, her voice soft but steady. "You are not just a survivor." He blinked, still confused. "Then what am I?" She looked into his eyes, heart pounding. "You are a key." Evan looked around the glowing chamber, then down at her hand, still holding his. Whatever had just begun, it was bigger than both of them, and somewhere far above. That blinking red star turned solid, no longer a warning. Now it was a countdown. The countdown began in silence. Not with a sound, but with a feeling. The ground vibrated beneath their feet like a distant drum calling something home. Evan leaned against the chamber wall, sweat on his brow, his heart pounding. Without reason, Zara stood close to him, her hand still locked in his, her tail flicking nervously behind her. The hunters had disappeared back into the jungle, too shaken to finish their task. But neither Evan nor Zara believed they were truly safe. The voice from the ancient machine still echoed in their minds. Chosen. Compatible cycle may begin. Evan didn't even know what the cycle was, but the pressure in his chest said it was serious. Zara walked slowly around the cracked, egg-shaped pillar. Tracing the glowing lines with her fingertips, it pulsed gently. Under her touch, like it recognized her too, but in a different way. "I've heard stories," she whispered, "about a time when the sky gods came and left seed in our people." Evan frowned, still trying to breathe steadily. "Seed?" he asked, confused. Zara looked at him with a strange mixture of fear and wonder. "My people were not always born here," she said slowly. "We were shaped long ago by someone like you." Evan blinked, trying to process the words. "Wait, are you saying your species is part human?" She didn't answer right away, only nodded once and looked back at the pillar, the swelling. She added after a pause, "Your body. It reacts to me because of that reason," Evan groaned, covering his face. "Can we stop talking about the swelling?" Zara tilted her head and smiled faintly. "It's the sign of connection." Before he could reply, the floor below them opened with a sharp hiss. Another tunnel appeared, glowing with soft white light. As if inviting them in, they exchanged a glance, then slowly walked forward. Side by side, the tunnel was smooth, the walls humming like they were alive. At the end was a large round room, filled with tall pods covered in glass. Inside each one was a humanoid figure. Some looked human. Others, like Zara. Evan stepped closer, wiping dust from one of the pods. The figure inside opened its eyes suddenly, golden and glowing. He stumbled back. But the figure did not move. A voice spoke again, not from speakers, but from inside their heads. "You are the last link," it said, "the final bond between stars and soil." Zara reached out and touched the glass, her skin glowing faintly as she did. The figure inside looked like her but older, royal, more complete. A projection filled the air, a memory showing ancient humans landing on her world. Evan watched as those early explorers embraced the native life. Blending DNA, it wasn't conquest, it was survival, evolution, partnership. "You were never strangers," the voice continued. "You were always meant to return." Evan backed away slowly, heart pounding in his chest. He turned to Zara, who now had tears in her eyes. "My tribe erased this history," she whispered. "They feared the truth." Suddenly, the room shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling. Red lights blinked along the walls, this time real alarms. "Real danger, external breach detected," the voice warned. "Hostiles approaching." Evan ran to the tunnel they came from, but it had already sealed shut. Zara grabbed 2 spears from the wall. Tossing one to him, he caught it awkwardly, his hands still shaking. "We fight?" he asked, still hoping there was another way. Zara's voice was calm but firm. "If we die, we die protecting the truth." From a ceiling hatch, a squad of heavily armored aliens dropped down. They carried energy rifles and moved in formation, no hesitation, no mercy. Evan stood in front of Zara, even though he knew he wasn't strong enough. But something inside him burned a pulse in his veins, like the machine had awakened something new. The alien soldiers raised their weapons, and Evan raised his hand. A shockwave burst from his palm, throwing the attackers back. Zara gasped, eyes wide with shock and pride. "You are changing," she whispered. "The machine. It chose you for a reason." Evan stared at his hand, stunned. I didn't know I could do that." She stepped forward, standing beside him. "Now you do." The attackers regrouped, but their eyes now showed fear. They realized this human was not ordinary, not anymore. The ancient power that once connected worlds had returned. And Evan, the broken survivor, was now the center of it. But this was only the beginning. Above the planet, ships moved into position, and the countdown reached its final number. The first missile struck the jungle with a roar that shook the sky itself. Trees burst into flames, animals scattered, and the clouds above glowed red with war. High above the planet, alien warships hovered like giant shadows, blocking the stars. Inside the ancient chamber, Evan stood frozen as the walls around him pulsed with energy. Zara held his arm tightly, her breath shallow. Her eyes locked on the ceiling above them. The voice in their minds returned. Now calm but urgent. Final sequence initiating. The key must choose. The cycle must complete. Evan looked at his own glowing hands, then at Zara, then at the row of sleeping figures in the pods. He didn't understand the full picture. But he knew this wasn't about him anymore. It was about her people, his people, and whatever they used to be long ago. Zara turned toward the machine's core, stepping into the circle of light, as if pulled by something unseen. Will this save us? Evan asked, barely whispering. Zara nodded slowly, though her eyes were filled with fear. The cycle is rebirth, she said, but it only begins if the human accepts it. Evan swallowed hard. Still bruised, still tired, but now burning. With something stronger purpose, he stepped beside her. Letting the energy rise through him, the chamber responded immediately. The ground glowing in patterns beneath their feet. The old machines woke up, lights flickering in forgotten corners. The ceiling opened, revealing the dark sky above, filled with warships preparing to strike. A beam of light shot upward from the chamber, like a signal into the stars. The enemy ships reacted instantly, scanning the source, locking weapons, but before they could fire, something strange happened. The light from the chamber spread like roots across the ground, then upward into the sky, touching each ship, wrapping around them gently like vines of light. Inside the command deck of the lead warship, alien generals shouted in panic. There. Systems froze, screens turned to static, and their weapons powered down one by one. The machines didn't crash, they surrendered. Responding to an ancient signal they couldn't fight, the cycle had awakened something older than war. Older than their hate. Back in the chamber, Evan dropped to his knees, his energy nearly gone. Zara caught him, pulling him close, her heart racing. You did it. She whispered, her voice trembling. You actually did it. He looked at her with a weak smile. I didn't even know what I was doing. She laughed softly and touched his cheek. You listened, she said. That was enough. The glowing faded from his body, and the air felt lighter now. Above them, the sky cleared, and stars returned. Where warships had once hovered, the sleeping pods around them opened slowly, releasing warm air and soft lights. Inside, figures stepped out, blinking, confused, and ancient. Humans and alien kin, side by side. Waking from a long slumber, Zara's eyes filled with tears, recognizing the face of her ancestor. Evan stood slowly, leaning on her shoulder. As the newly awakened looked at him with silent awe, you were the last piece. One of them spoke in an echoing voice, the bridge between what was and what must come. Evan didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. Zara squeezed his hand gently, then whispered, They will write songs about you. He chuckled, shaking his head. Can they skip the part about the swelling? Zara laughed too, but this time there was softness in her laughter. No, she said. That part is important. He groaned and looked up at the stars. Of course it is, as the chamber lights dimmed, and the jungle outside began to heal. Zara pulled him close and pressed her forehead to his. Stay with me, she said softly, not as the chosen, not as the savior, just you. Evan looked into her eyes and smiled. Only if you stop poking that swelling. She smirked. No promises, and somewhere deep in the planet's roots, ancient machines hummed with approval. The war had ended, the cycle had begun, and a new legend was born of a broken man from the stars, and the alien girl who rubbed his wounds and woke the stars again.